The moment she walked into the room, he did not recognize her. That was the first thing worth noting. Not the dress. Not the quiet confidence she carried the way certain people carry money, like it had always belonged to them and had simply been waiting for them to arrive. What was worth noting, what would stay with anyone who witnessed it, was the look on Rhett Calloway's face the moment he finally did recognize her. It was a flicker, 2 seconds, maybe less. Then it was gone, buried beneath the practiced composure of a man who had spent his entire adult life deciding what things were worth. But those 2 seconds told the whole story. Because in those 2 seconds, something moved across his face that had nothing to do with surprise. It was closer to the particular, uncomfortable feeling of being wrong about something you were very sure of. And the worst part, the part he would turn over in the dark later that night, was that she had been watching for it. And she had not reacted at all. Her name was Nadia Osei, 32 years old, founder and majority shareholder of Vantage Metric Solutions, a real estate data analytics firm she had built from a 1-bedroom apartment in Charlotte with a laptop, a spreadsheet, and roughly 18 months of almost no sleep. She had just been named to a regional business journal's list of top emerging investors in the Southeast. She had been invited to the gala because one of the event's principal hosts had quietly vouched for her to the organizing committee. She had accepted the invitation without fanfare. She arrived alone. She told no one she was coming. Rhett Calloway was 38. He was tall in the way that old money made men tall, like the architecture of the world had been drawn at a height that suited him specifically. He was the co-founder and CEO of Callaway Meridian Group, a luxury residential development company with 12 completed properties and one very large, very public upcoming project, a mixed-use waterfront development in the Carolinas called the Halcyon, valued at just over $240 million. His name was on 2 buildings. His father's name was on the wing of a hospital. He had been, since roughly the age of 25, the kind of man who entered rooms expecting them to rearrange themselves around him. Most of the time, they did. He was standing near the far end of the venue's main hall when he saw her. The Whitmore Grand Hotel, a fundraiser for a regional architecture foundation. Exactly the kind of event where deals were made while appetizers were passed around on silver trays, where the real conversations happened in the margins of the formal ones. The room was full of developers, investors, attorneys, and the particular type of person who existed comfortably at the intersection of all three. Nadia had been speaking quietly with a woman from a Charlotte-based equity group when she turned, and across 40 feet of marble floor and ambient conversation and the low, warm noise of money being polite to itself, she and Rhett locked eyes. She did not look away first. She did not smile. She simply held his gaze for a long, even moment, unhurried, unapologetic, like someone reviewing a document they've read before, and then she returned her attention to her conversation. She had not looked away. She had simply decided she was finished. Before you hear the rest of this, welcome to this channel. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now, hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Let's get into this. 6 years earlier, Nadia had not been standing in a ballroom. She had been standing in the parking lot of a restaurant called Hargrove's on a Tuesday evening in October, wearing a jacket she'd borrowed from her roommate because the one she owned had a broken zipper she hadn't had the money to fix yet. She was holding a to-go bag because Rhett had said it was just easier to eat at her place. She remembered the smell of that night, car exhaust, and the specific metallic cold of approaching rain. She remembered she had been smiling when she walked through the door because earlier that day he had texted saying he had something to ask her. She thought she knew what the question was. She had been wrong. What Rhett had to ask her was whether she had given any real thought to where her life was going. He said it gently. He said it with the measured, careful tone of a man who has already made his decision and is only speaking now as a courtesy. He told her he cared about her, and that was exactly why he was choosing honesty. He said his family had expectations. He said the people in his world operated at a certain. He paused and selected the word the way someone selects a tool, trajectory. He said he didn't think she fit into that trajectory. Not the way things were. Not right now. She hadn't said anything immediately. She had looked at him for a moment. A long, quiet, entirely still moment. And she would remember later that she hadn't been angry yet. She had simply been trying to understand what she was hearing. Whether it was real. Whether he was actually sitting across from her in a parking lot telling her she was not enough. Not because she had done something wrong, but because her bank account didn't match the life he had always imagined for himself. Whether this was the same man who had held her hand at his cousin's wedding 6 weeks earlier and leaned down and said something in her ear that had made her laugh so hard she'd had to press her face into his shoulder. She thanked him for being honest. She said it clearly. She got in her car. She did not cry. She sat in the driveway of her apartment complex for 23 minutes, the engine off, the borrowed jacket still on, the to-go bag in her lap. She did not call anyone. She did not replay the conversation. She sat in complete silence, and she made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a vengeful one, just a quiet, private, absolute one. That she was going to build something he could never again look past. She went inside, ate the food alone, and went to sleep. The next morning, she registered for 2 additional online courses and updated her resume. What made Nadia dangerous was not ambition. There is no shortage of ambition. What made her dangerous was patience, and the particular kind of clarity that arrives when someone removes every illusion about who is in your corner and who is merely standing nearby. She finished her graduate program in 11 months instead of 18 by studying from 11 at night until 2 in the morning after her 2 jobs. She took a position at a property analytics firm in Raleigh and spent the next 2 years learning how developers misread neighborhood data, where they looked, and, more importantly, what they refused to see. She built a proprietary modeling system for predicting equity shifts before they became visible to the broader market, alone, on weekends, in a corner of her apartment with a whiteboard and a diet of gas station coffee. She found a partner in a woman named Dorinda Cruz, a former commercial real estate attorney turned fintech consultant, who had the specific intelligence of someone trained to read the sentences that everyone else glossed over. Dorinda put in $50,000 in a handshake at a diner table outside Raleigh. Nadia was 29. She had $412 in her personal account the morning they signed the agreement. Vantage Metric Solutions launched without ceremony. Within 18 months, it was profitable. Within 3 years, it had been cited in 2 national industry reports and completed a data licensing deal that valued the company north of $30 million. Nadia owned 68% of it. She had not thought about Rhett Calloway in a long time. She had made the practiced, deliberate choice not to. The work had required all of her, and there was no room left in it for parking lots or borrowed jackets or the feeling of sitting in a driveway in the dark. But Dorinda had thought about him. That was the thing Nadia would only fully understand later. Dorinda Cruz had spent 3 years as outside counsel before pivoting, and during those years she had briefly touched a deal adjacent to one of Callaway Meridian's early properties. She understood how Rhett operated, brilliant at vision, structurally dependent on other people's capital to execute it. She knew that the Halcyon was carrying residual debt from 2 previous projects that had run over budget, and that the equity structure of the development was layered in a way that made it acutely sensitive to the specific composition of its investor partners. More precisely, she had found, buried in a section of the Halcyon's investor rights agreement, that most people skip the way people skip terms and conditions, a governance clause. It stated that any party holding a minimum threshold equity position could formally trigger a management review of the project if certain financing benchmarks were not met by a specified date. That date was 11 weeks from the night of the Whitmore Grand Gala. Dorinda had said nothing to Nadia when she first found it. She had simply watched the company grow. She had kept the document in a folder. She had waited. And when the gala invitation arrived, forwarded from a contact in the equity group that held a position in the Halcyon, Dorinda had said, over the phone, in the casual tone she used when she was being most deliberate, "I think you should go. We're something you feel good in." What Nadia did not yet know was that Dorinda had, 18 months earlier, structured a quiet investment into the Halcyon secondary pool through a holding entity called Osei Capital Partners. The name was plain enough to be invisible. The position was sized to stay beneath the threshold of attention, but it met the governance clause trigger. By less than 2 percentage points, but it met it. The clock had already been running for 18 months. Nadia simply hadn't known she was holding the watch. Rhett found her at the bar 40 minutes after she had watched him recognize her and bury it. She had spent those 40 minutes doing exactly what she needed to do, moving through the room at a measured pace, speaking to the right people, listening more than she spoke, letting her presence establish itself without announcement. She was standing alone at the far end of the bar, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a glass of sparkling water, looking out at the city below, unhurried, self-contained, when she heard him approach. She did not turn immediately. She gave it 3 full seconds. Just long enough to be noticeable, just short enough to be deniable. Then she turned. "Nadia." He said her name carefully, the way someone places a foot on ice before committing their weight. She looked at him. "Rhett." "A beat. It's been a while." "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. "I was invited." The simplest possible answer. No elaboration. She let it sit. He smiled. The practiced, warm, effortless smile she had once found entirely convincing. "You look well." "Thank you." She did not return the compliment. She waited. He gestured, vaguely, at the room. "Congratulations on everything. I read the piece in the journal. It's impressive." "It's been a good few years," she said. That was all. He asked about her work in the careful, circling way people ask about things they don't know enough about to ask directly. She answered briefly. She did not mention valuations, client lists, or growth projections. She let the conversation sit at its surface, like something floating in still water, and then she glanced past him at someone across the room, turned back to him with a small, pleasant, completely final smile, and said, "It was good to see you." She walked away. She did not look back. He stood there for a moment, holding his drink. The room kept moving. She could feel, without needing to see, the particular quality of stillness she had left behind her. Over the following 3 weeks, the meetings at Callaway Meridian's downtown office were professional, structured, and entirely cordial on the surface. Underneath the surface, something else was happening. Rhett was attentive in those meetings in a way that was different from charm. He asked good questions. He listened. He was more impressed by Vantage Metrics' modeling system than he wanted to show, and she could read the precise moment in each meeting when that impression would arrive behind his eyes before he managed to compose it. There was something almost sad about it, she thought. How long it had taken him to look at her properly. He needed her firm's credibility attached to the Halcyon before his next investor presentation. She understood that clearly. He was trying to shore up the story of the project, and her name would help it. What he didn't know, what he hadn't thought to check, because he had never considered her position anything other than an opportunity he was extending to her, was that the story had already changed. Dorinda laid it out for Nadia on a Sunday afternoon at her kitchen table. All of it. The Osei Capital Partners position. The governance clause. The timeline, now reduced to 7 weeks. She explained what would happen if the financing benchmark was missed, which Nadia's own modeling suggested it would be. She explained the cascade. The secondary investor review requests. The regulatory filing. The public record. The very specific, very permanent damage to the reputation of a man who traded on reputation the way other men traded on currency. Nadia sat with the documents in front of her for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, rain had started. "He doesn't know I'm the position," she said finally. "He has no idea," Dorinda said. Nadia turned a page. "Read it again." "What do I want?" "I think you want him to understand the full distance between what he decided you were and what you actually are," Dorinda said. "And I think you want that understanding to cost him something proportionate." Nadia set the document down. She looked out the window at the rain for a long time without speaking. Then she picked it back up and read the whole thing again from the beginning. The investor presentation for the Halcyon was held at the Whitmore Grand 3 weeks later. 40 people in a conference room on the 14th floor. Rhett presented with the ease of a man entirely comfortable in his own mythology. The renderings were spectacular. The financials were framed with precision. He moved through the room with the relaxed authority of someone who had stood at many podiums and never yet been surprised by what happened when he finished speaking. Toward the end of the presentation, he introduced the Vantage Metric Analytics Partnership. Her company's name appeared on the screen behind him. He described the partnership in terms that were, by any technical reading, premature. They had not signed a contract, but the room received it warmly. He turned, briefly, to look at her across the table as the applause landed, and the look on his face was the quiet satisfaction of a man who has placed a piece exactly where he intended it. He thought she was his endorsement. She held his gaze for exactly as long as she had in the ballroom 6 weeks earlier. Steady, unreadable. Then she looked down at the document in front of her. After the formal presentation, during the reception, Rhett's attorney approached Nadia with the partnership agreement. She took it. She read the first 3 pages slowly, clearly, without hurrying. The attorney waited. Then she looked up and said she would need her counsel to review it before signing. The attorney said that was completely reasonable. She thanked him and moved away. In the elevator, she texted Dorinda a single word: "Tomorrow." The next morning, the governance review request was filed through Osei Capital Partners. By 11 a.m., 3 calls had come in from Calloway Meridian's legal team. By noon, Rhett called himself. She let it ring once, twice. She picked up on the 3rd ring and said nothing. Just waited. "What is this?" His voice was very controlled. That was what she noticed first, how hard he was working to stay level. "A governance review request," she said. "It's a mechanism written into your own investor rights agreement. Section 14, paragraph 3. Silence." She let it stand. "Osei Capital Partners," he said finally, the realization arriving in his voice 1 syllable at a time. "That's you. It has been for about 18 months.
Another silence. This one was different. This one had weight to it. She could hear him recalibrating, rereading the last several weeks in this new light. The gala, the meetings, the presentation, her composure throughout all of it, the way she had looked at him from across the table and said nothing. "You've been sitting on this," he said. "Still controlled. Just barely. I've been a passive investor in your project," she said. "Watching the benchmarks. Since before the gala. Long before." The silence that followed this was the longest one. She did not fill it. She had learned, in the years since a parking lot in October, that silence was not empty. It was one of the most precise instruments available to a person who knew how to use it. "What do you want, Nadia?" There it was. The question with all its history inside it. From a man who had once told her, gently, in a parking lot while it was starting to rain, that she didn't quite fit. She did not answer immediately. She let the question sit in the air between them on the phone line for a full 4 seconds. She wanted him to hear how small it sounded. She wanted him to feel, for one moment, what it was like to ask a question and not be certain of the answer. "I want the partnership agreement canceled," she said. "I never intended to sign it." I want the Vantage metric name removed from any Halcyon materials it was added to before we had a signed agreement. And I want the governance review to proceed through the proper regulatory process." She paused. "That is all." "Do you understand what this does to the timeline?" he said. "I understand what your own documents require," she said. "Whether a review disrupts anything depends entirely on whether the project is sound." A pause. "Is it sound, Rhett?" "Nothing." She waited. The silence stretched out. 5 seconds, 6, and she did not help him fill it. She had been in that parking lot. She had sat in that driveway for 23 minutes in the dark. She had earned every one of these seconds. "I hope it is," she said finally, and she meant it without irony, without cruelty, without any of the satisfaction she might have been expected to feel. "I genuinely do." She ended the call. She set the phone down on her desk. She looked out the window for a moment. The city below, the ordinary bright morning of a day that felt different from the ones before it. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. The governance review was filed. In the context of large-scale development finance, it was procedural. There was no courtroom, no headline in bold print, no moment of theatrical collapse. But in the closed rooms where Rhett Calloway's reputation functioned as capital, procedure had consequences. The timing was what made it land. 2 secondary investors quietly requested reviews of their own positions within 10 days. The Halcyon's closing timeline was pushed back by 4 months. The project's management structure was formally re-examined. The name Osei Capital Partners, once it was understood to be the entity behind the review, became a reference point in every conversation about the project, in every room where it had previously been discussed as untouchable. Rhett Calloway was not destroyed. His name was still on 2 buildings. His father's name was still on the hospital wing. But the project he had intended to define the next decade of his career, the project he had introduced her company at, on a screen behind him, in front of 40 people who measured worth in the same currency he always had, that project was delayed, scrutinized, and restructured by someone who had once stood in a parking lot holding a borrowed jacket, nodding while he explained she didn't fit his trajectory. There is a version of this story that ends louder. A courtroom, a headline, a public moment of reckoning that lands like a verdict everyone can see. This story does not end that way. And in some ways, that is exactly what makes it the version that stays with you. Nadia Osei drove back to Charlotte the evening the review was filed. She called Dorinda from the road, and they talked for 40 minutes about nothing related to work. She made dinner when she got home. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and worked on a new client proposal until midnight. She did not post anything. She did not send a message. She did not go back to the parking lot, even in her mind. She had built something real. She had required him, once, publicly, in the presence of the people whose opinions shaped his world, to account for himself. That was the full extent of what she had wanted. What he had assumed, 6 years ago in a parking lot while it was starting to rain, was that she was temporary, that she was the kind of person whose absence wouldn't change the shape of anything. He had made that assessment quietly, gently, and with complete confidence. He had been wrong about the gentleness changing what it was, and she had spent 6 years building the proof of it. Not for him, not for any room he was in, but for herself. The room had just turned out to be the same one. She had looked at him. He had had to look back. That was enough. That had always been exactly enough. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are more stories on this channel that will stay with you the same way this one did. And leave a comment before you go. Do you think what she did was revenge, or was it just arithmetic? We'll be in the comments reading every one. See you in the next one.